Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. Okay, this is the meeting of the Valley Stream Book Club, and tonight we're reading or discussing the book The Hunter by Jennifer Herrera, who is our guest today. It was a new book that came out and came across my desk, and when I see these books, I said, "Oh, this looks kind of interesting." So I contacted Jennifer, and she was very gracious about saying that she would join us for at least part of our meeting, as long as she's able to. So the group has read your book and or most of the book, in case they got it a little late. So it should be a very interesting discussion. And maybe you would start off by telling us a little about how you wrote it, and I know your background. Okay.
Great. Yeah. Um, Hi, it's good to see everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. This is so much fun for me. So I lived in New York City for about 10 years. And during that time, I came across a lot of stories. I work in publishing generally. And so I've always really loved crime fiction. I don't know about, the makeup of this group, whether or not you like to read that sort of thing. But for me, it's always been really satisfying. You come into the story with a mystery that needs to be solved. You have a big personality, usually a detective who comes in and sort of, susses out the truth from all of these fictions. And so for me, I think that setup was really interesting. And then it's like, how do you take that setup and turn it into a story that felt very real for me, very true? And so I wanted it to be about, this unreliable narrator, Lee O'Donnell, who is unreliable in a different sort of way. She's not unreliable because she has an alcohol addiction or a drug addiction, or if she has some sort of medical condition that means that her experiences, aren't to be trusted. She's unreliable because she's really human, and she's told herself a story about her life, and that story may or may not be true. And I think that that's something, that I've always really related to, because I don't know how many times you guys have had it where you talk to a family member or you talk to a friend and you try to relate the same incident, and they're like, no, 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 it didn't happen that way. Right. And so your experiences are so different. And so I wanted to play with that with our narrator so that you got this sense of, she's made a big mistake and she doesn't know why she did it. And so part of the story is trying to figure out, like, why did she do the thing that she did? And does she remember things exactly as they really happened?
Okay, we're a small group, so if you'd like to add some comments, please feel free to ask. I think Jennifer would appreciate some feedback. Have you been doing a lot of other book talks or?
Yeah, so I've done a number of book clubs, which are always really fun for me, I think, too, because it's just nice to, like, talk to people who've read the book and what you like, what you didn't like, questions you had. And I've been doing a lot of podcasts too, which I think are also really fun. And that's just like a one-on-one format.
Mhm. Now, how did you pick the location, Ohio, that she ended up going back to being her hometown?
Yeah, so I'm actually from Ohio originally. So I moved from Ohio. I moved all around actually. I've lived in Missouri and California and Michigan. And I then entered, or I moved to New York City when I entered publishing. And so for me, it's always been like this comparison, right? I don't know how many of you guys have like always lived in Nassau County, or like you've always sort of experienced the same world, but I didn't know how different my experiences were until I moved somewhere else. And I was like, oh, those things about Ohio are really strange. Or the things about New York City are really strange because, you can see the contrast. And so for me, I think I've always been fascinated by that contrast between, in particular, between Ohio and New York, because those are the two places I've lived the longest amount of time. I moved to Philly, pretty recently. So I know New York much better. And I know law enforcement in New York a little better. So when I was in New York, I had a lot of friends who, who worked for the FBI or who worked for the NYPD in different capacities. One of my friends sued the NYPD for discrimination. I don't know that she won the lawsuit, but people were in this world in different capacities. And so I felt like I could represent those things pretty authentically.
So you had friends who were in the NYPD, and I thought that Lee O'Donnell in her police detective role was really very good. She was very smart. She was very relatable. I didn't really relate to or understand Lee in her wife role. So did
Yeah.
you have a person or people or experiences in mind that you were thinking of when you wrote her in her wife role?
Yeah, I think for me, I have a husband, I have kids, right? So that sort of felt very natural for me. I think, around the time we were selling this, Mayor of Easttown was a really big thing on HBO. And so I liked the idea of having, this person who had this contrast, who had difficulty sort of embracing this wife role, this mom role, because that didn't feel as comfortable to her, right? That wasn't an area that was as safe for her. So because of the way she grew up, where it's like, her parents died, she felt really adrift. She felt like that world wasn't as understandable to her as her role as a police officer, as a detective, right? Because as a detective, she's always had this really clear identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, she had a really good solve rate, so she could have the sense of control in her work life that she never had in her home life. And so a lot of what's happening in the book is her like stumbling her way through figuring out how to be better at her home life so that she doesn't struggle as much in this world.
So hearing you say that, I think that the book that did that very well. She definitely was stumbling through her personal life.
Yeah, she was. And I thought it would be really fun to take somebody like a detective and, have her, the beginning, you think the big problem to be solved is this mystery, is this case of who killed these men, did they die from homicide? And then you find out the big problem to be solved is actually her home life. And how does she get over this hump so that she can have a better home life?
I found it interesting because the fact that she didn't seem to identify that much with the place that she was from, and she had so much family there. But my impression was that she moved to New York and she became she got, was working for the NYPD and then became a detective. And that became, very much her world. She loved it. But she's still young enough that I would still think that she would identify somewhat with her home in Ohio. I was surprised that she didn't at all, because I grew up in Valley Stream, and then I lived in many other countries in the world, states, and I always missed that home. I guess it depends if you had a happy life prior to leaving.
Yeah, I think for her, it's like she wants to on some level to be more involved with her home life. She's just so closed off. She's so closed off from that part of herself because she's so scared about it. Again, it's like, part of what sort of inspired Lee as a person is that, I have three cousins who both lost both parents when they were 15 and 16. So they lost one parent when they were 15 because they're triplets, and the other parent when they were 16. And I got to see, I think, and experience how hard that was for everybody, and how much of yourself you lose when you lose your parents really young. And how it means that, there are just parts of yourself that you close off because you have to, because you don't have the maturity to deal with that yet. And so what it looked like for her was that she had to have this horrible thing happen before she could go back and like as a more mature person and reconnect with the place where she was from so that she could embrace those parts of herself so they weren't as scary. And so you know, so as you're saying, like, so she could identify more with that place, because that's, you know, we all identify so strongly with wherever we were from, right? It's ingrained in us.
Mhm. Yeah.
And maybe her brother making his revelations, his marriage, you know, coming to an end, and you know, his revelation about his sexual orientation. Maybe that sort of made her feel more comfortable with being more truthful about herself.
Yes,
With
absolutely.
herself.
Absolutely. I think that she needed him to be vulnerable first. She
Mhm.
wasn't going to do it first.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question about how you wrote the book. I just found it every time I turned around, there was something like unexpected. So when you're doing this, did you have like a timeline or something that you knew that you had to kind of follow and then you jumped off? Or like, I just couldn't imagine trying to do this.
Yeah, I think it's you know, part of the reason there are a lot of unexpected moments is I think like that's sort of what you want, is it's what I want as a reader. The worst thing that can happen for me when I'm reading is just to feel really bored. Because if I feel bored, I just kind of like read to get to the end, or I don't feel like I just feel like you know, the author is kind of taking their time, and I'm like, come on, let's go. What's going on?
Well, you kind
And
of
so for me,
in things.
yeah,
I
say that
say,
again.
sorry for interrupting. I say
No,
you
please.
sprinkled in things along the way to make it give us more interest. You know, the
Oh,
gay
good. I'm
people,
glad.
the relics, what happened to, you know, I really wanted to find out more about the Indians that were chased off their land, and if any of them came back to this town, knowing that there was so much, you know, the sale of the artifacts and things like that. But I mean, you did a little bit of everything, the gay thing, the parents, the child. The father had won the house in a card game, supposedly. And that's what made these people that were on the wrong side of the tracks. They really weren't one of the rich ones. Now they had the house, which gave them some clout in the town. A little bit of everything. And
Yeah, yeah. I think because like I understand that so much of how we read is, you know, I like really a lot of layers when I read. And I also felt like, you know, if we're really, really digging into this town, we're digging into the mythology of the town. And the mythology of the town is that, you know, they have this bootstraps mentality. They did it all themselves. They, you know, they're self-sustaining, self-sufficient. And I thought that it was really important to just address the ways in which that's not true. So if we're talking about the lies that Lee tells herself, we have to talk about the lies that the community she's in tells herself. Like, how are they lying to themselves about how they got to that place? And how can we use that in the story so that it feels like, you know, the things Lee's struggling with are the things that, you know, that community is struggling with as well. How do they make sense of this thing they don't like about themselves, that they've lied to about themselves, so that they can move forward as the community?
Actually, but I'm not sure that they don't want to change. They're going to have to be forced
Right.
into change, and
Yeah.
this everything coming out is going to force them. They were perfectly comfortable. They built their wonderful lives on top of the backs of, you know, Native Americans. They weren't going to change unless they were made to change.
That's right.
They didn't see
That's right.
anything wrong with themselves.
They
You
still
know,
don't. I don't think.
seven leading families thought they were perfectly fine. And they were justified in stealing from others.
Uh-huh. That's right. That's right. And I thought that was really interesting to play with too, is to play with the dynamics between the sticks and like the main part of town. And this idea that like the main part of town just could not grasp the idea that the people from like the quote unquote poor section were actually the ones who were self-sustaining. And that, you know, they were very much trying to dig their claws into that because they couldn't deal with the fact that, you know, the quote unquote richer part of the community was actually the one falling in some sort of like economic standard. So that I thought was really interesting. And it, you know, it mirrors the problem they've always had for years and years and years. Again, like you said, where they can't deal with the fact that they didn't really do it themselves and that, you know, they're built on this very big lie.
And they could rationalize it by saying that the people who were living in the forest were bootlegging, as compared to recognizing these are really enterprising people who are making that maple syrup.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they had to think the worst of those people.
And I think, you know, one of the things I was really interested in was looking at civil asset forfeitures, and how those have been, you know, that's a real thing, and how those have been used and misused by police, in order to steal from communities that, like, the police think aren't deserving of those resources. And so, like, it's very much about power structures and how the power structures, and like the flaws that people have become the flaws that these systems have. And once the systems have these flaws, then, you know, that manifests as a greater form of oppression.
But it was such a corrupt police department.
Mm.
I mean, it was really hard to read about them and to go through the process with them. You know, there was no savior there. And Eric seemed to be one of the decent people in the book. He was a decent character. He was,
yeah, I think so.
He worked in the police department. He did his best to move up in the system. He treated her fairly. He loved his child. You know, he didn't tell her about the cancer, but yet when she found out by reading his mail, she just blew it. I mean, she just didn't have the maturity to deal with her marriage.
Yeah. I think I mean, all of that's true. And I think it's really sad, but, you know, for her, she, you know, in order for her to get that maturity, she needed to go through something. Because it was like, I think this is true of a lot of people too. It's like something happened when you were a kid that stunts you in certain ways. And you're not always aware of the way that you're stunted until something happens in your adult life and you're confronted with it. Then all of a sudden you have to take a step back, where literally she goes back to the place where she's from, to really figure out, okay, where did she go wrong? And you find out that this is a pattern, right? That she lied to herself about her mom's cancer. You know, because at the time she just had such a hard time grasping it. And I think that that's also, you know, a problematic way that her family existed, where, you know, they had lied to her for a long time about her mom's cancer so that she had an easier time lying to herself about it. So I think I think it's all related. And it is really sad, but on the bright side, you know, they get back together at the end. She has this growth and maturity. And I at least am hopeful that things go a little better for them for at least a while.
Yeah, you said about a serial, the next chapter in her life.
Yeah, there's actually going to be another book. So there's a book that's a follow-up to this book. So I guess you'll get to see. You're
I'd like
interested.
to see what happens with her daughter. I mean, Eric had stage 4 cancer, so I'm not too hopeful.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Pretty rough. Yeah, when the next book starts, it's 2 years later. Yes, that's what I'll say.
Finished writing yet?
Oh no, it's about halfway done, but I have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen in the rest. But I'm not positive, and I won't be positive until I get there.
So you wrote this book thinking it was going to be a one-shot deal. And then your publisher encouraged you to follow up?
Yeah, they wanted another book, and I was happy to write one. I felt like I had gotten Lee through this really terrible time in her life. And I thought, well, that's not the only problem, for instance, that she's going to have with her husband or that she's going to have with her work. And so what is a way that I can give her more problems or excavate, the problems that she already has, so we can learn more about how, how human nature works in this case, or how she can grow, and how, the reader can see a certain situation anew, perhaps, and hopefully have a good time on the way.
Well, so I was reading it and I was thinking about what's next for her. I was thinking that, well, she may go back to New York, but it's temporary because New York is toxic for her.
Yeah.
And that she's really going to end up going back home because she has those uncles that she thinks she has a really good, seems to have a good relationship with. And the sheriff is going to, be forced out of office because of all the graft, and she'll become the sheriff.
No, interesting. Interesting. All right, you have to read and see if it's true. I think you're certainly right that New York is temporary for her.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
I like this though. Yeah, sheriff's got to go. Got to go.
Yeah, the sheriff's got to go. Becker's got to go.
Got to go.
Now that we met you, we want to see a little bit of Valley Stream in it.
Oh, okay. I'll do my best.
She leaves
the library can feature prominently. What's that?
She leaves the city and moves to Long Island.
Sadly, I don't think I could represent that authentically. I think if one of you guys want to write your Long Island book, that would be great.
Well, that's something that, when people write about other places, there's always someone who has been at that town, and if you make a mistake, they know.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Your town
that's why I write about mythical places.
Okay, so it's definitely a mythical place.
Oh, because I am from a town in rural Ohio that's population of 1,300. Very small, like Copper Falls. Not as pretty as Copper Falls, but it's like, I couldn't even write about that place because I have such a different experience from our neighbors who have different experience from their neighbors. And that's like, you're never going to satisfy anybody. And I think for me, I was really interested in taking a setting and giving it these like mythical qualities so that you could get the sense of like, it's this kind of like fairy tale world where you have maybe fairy tale logic, right? You have this sense of the deep dark caves and what's in them, and the rich part and the poor part of town and things like that, like things that you can play with. Whereas if it were a real place, it would all kind of be like, mushed together.
Why did you make her so irresponsible as far as going into the caves without backup? The first time she almost got, I think it was Mason, killed.
Yeah.
And they both survived, but then she went in again and again. And
because
I was
interested.
What kind of mother was she? Her husband was sick and gonna die, and she had no thought of her daughter who was going to take care of her.
Yeah, because I think on the one hand, that's her big problem, is that she is really reckless about a lot of things and has like this very strong tunnel vision with her work, because she feels like she understands her work and she doesn't understand her home life. And I think that, because of the themes of the book where, she's battling a bad guy, right? But like the real battle is with herself. So I had to have, the real person endangering her be herself. Not, she's not being, there's no scene where like a bad guy is following her. There's no scene where she's like, somebody's pointing a gun at her and she's dodging bullets, right? When she's in danger, she's putting herself in danger, which I wanted to like echo this sense of, the person she's trying to conquer is this worse version of herself. It's not an external thing, it's an internal thing.
Interesting.
Most of the books I've read lately always have, you know, they have one setting that's like 100 years ago or 50 years ago, and then another group of people that are living 50 years later, and somehow they tie everything together. So yours was one of the few books nowadays that I've read. It's a straight, you know, narrative, you know, you go from A to B.
Did you like that, or you wish it had more, you know,
I
back and
wasn't
forth?
used to it. I wasn't used to
Okay.
it anymore.
Oh, that's
No,
funny.
I enjoyed your imagery also.
Oh, thank
You were
you.
talking about scenes and you know, what things look like. I thought was quite good, and I like things to go from A to B, and you know, without going back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah, me too. Sometimes I just lose steam if you go back and forth too much. I have a short attention span, I think, for whatever reason.
That's interesting. Yeah. So now have you written other books prior to this one?
I mean, nothing serious, just some like, you know, fun stuff. A very, very, very long time ago, I think when I first wanted to see if I could get from beginning to end with a book, I think I was like 22 or something. And I wrote a crime novel that was very, very bad. I was 22, had never done, you know, I had never put more than 10,000 words together for anything. But it had a great title. I really liked it. It was called Ticking Bombshell. It was pretty ridiculous. But yeah, so this is the first kind of like, you know, big thing to have written. And I'm excited to see what it's like to write, you know, hopefully to finish the next book, because, you know, it's an extension of the first book. So now it's like having written an even bigger book, because the first one was about 80,000 words. And so like after I'm done, I will have written like 160,000 words that kind of all go together. And that'll be a strange feeling.
Yeah.
Did you have a mentor, or you know, like, or just your writing experience kind of shaped how you were going?
Yeah, I didn't really have a mentor. I work in publishing, so I am pretty aware of like the standard for what it, you know, what's required to get a book published. I have friends who, you know, write together, read each other's stuff, that kind of thing. And that's been really nice because, you know, I have one friend who, you know, is very into details. So I had this idea of, you know, Lee owns this house, but she hasn't, you know, been to it in years and years and years. And my friend was like, well, who pays taxes on the house? She had like all of these very, very detailed questions about logistics, which I appreciated because I'm not, you know, that's not always where my head is at. I had other people reading who were like, this feels strange, and I don't know that I feel right, who were reading for that level as well. So, so in general, I just had a bunch of people read it and tell me what they thought. So like, this is really nice to kind of hear the parts that you guys liked, the parts that you didn't like, what, you know, felt weird to you as you were reading, that kind of thing. Because I think most writers who are, you know, worth anything, they write in order for the book to be enjoyed by other people. Like that's the whole point. And so hearing more about the things people like and didn't like, I think is always really wonderful.
Well, I think the only part of the book that people might have trouble understanding and would have to think about it is how she sabotages her career and her marriage in her denial. You know, her compartmentalizing and putting the cancer aside, and you know, just sabotaging her entire career the very next day. I think that's the hardest element to understand.
I see. Yeah, and that I get. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, that's pretty extreme.
It is really extreme.
It's pretty extreme.
Her uncles were nice.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked them. Yeah, my mom really does have three brothers, and they're all kind of ridiculous when they get into a room together. They just like the energy in the room changes because they're all, kind of like teasing each other, or they become, I always joke, they become like tropes of themselves. And I think that happens when you're in a family, like you take up a certain role, and then, who you are within that family unit is maybe different than who you are at work or who you are with your friends, right? And so getting to see the uncles and how they relate to each other, I thought was really, really fun for me to write because I have so many uncles. And I thought it was nice because you get to see what Lee has been missing all of these years. Again, she's told herself the story of she doesn't want to go home anymore. Nothing is there for her. And then you get to meet these people at her home life and you see, oh, these people like aren't terrible. They're really great. And you get to realize sort of what a shame it is that she has closed herself off to this world and kind of what's at stake for her in her growth, because unless she grows and matures in all of these important ways, she doesn't get to experience that family anymore. And what a shame that would be. So for me, it really like raised the stakes of the story so that you want her to succeed because you want her to be able to be a part of this world again.
But even though she didn't want to go home, she clearly, trusted all of her uncles. I mean, she left her 4-year-old daughter.
Yeah, she really did.
And like immediately all day long.
Yep.
Without
So she really did.
or care.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I think that for me felt very believable because like they're her family. Like, and if you're, I don't know what it's, what like the vibe is in Long Island. But I know that in the Midwest, it's like your family. You do it because you're family. And there's the sense of like a sanctity. So, one of my favorite parts, one of the parts that felt very real to me was when her brother has to move out of his house and everybody just helps him move, because that to me is like so Midwestern. It's like, it wasn't until I moved out of the Midwest that I was like, oh, people hire moving companies? Like that's a thing? I was like, they don't have family? What is that? Because it was so like every time I moved, all of my uncles, no matter what they were doing, came to like help move my stuff, even if it was out of state, or we just did that for each other. And so to me it was like, she trusts her uncles with her daughter because she really does like trust and love them. She just doesn't know how to be a part of their life, and that's what she has to learn, like how she can be a part of their lives, without sort of going into a panic.
It's like she wasn't really interacting with them. And the only interaction was really, going backwards because of the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then it isn't until she thinks that the case is over with, that it, we're all done, that she's able, they have that big dinner together, right? Where she's able to just like be a person with them and be their family member and not, just be kind of using them for information or for babysitting, frankly.
I just wanted to say that toast at that dinner was one of my favorite lines. It was hysterical.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I really liked the dinner part too, because I think again it just like represents this shift in her where she's being a part of the family, not just like quote unquote like visiting her family. And then you get to see, right after that dinner, she goes to find her daughter. Her daughter's not in her room. Where is she? She sees that her daughter has taken over her parents' room, and that her family has like, put freaking armadillos everywhere because Simone loves armadillos. And it's such this sweet moment because you see, how welcoming they are to her and how much they want her to be a part of that space again. And they've literally made space for her family. And so hopefully at that point you get the sense of like, oh, the healing has begun. She's not using her work to escape her home life anymore. she's like actually embracing her home life, even if it's just for a little bit.
I have a question. What I didn't understand in the book was that, yeah, she moved to New York, she joined the NYPD, then she became a detective, and then she stopped working because she shot her partner or something, okay? And it's like you're told in the book that that happened years ago, and there's nothing about what has she been doing all those years. I know she got married to this to Eric, you know, and she had a daughter, but it's like she hasn't worked or done anything in many
Oh,
years.
it's she hasn't worked for 6 months.
What?
So it's 6 months between when she doesn't shoot her partner. She like points her weapon at her partner.
And lets the other black guy escape. And for some reason, she felt bad for this black guy who is still presumed innocent until he goes to court and he's guilty. And somehow her husband, Eric, I think faced a lot of problems, you know, and mistrust. And he was trying to make his way through a white police department as a black man, and somehow that mixed her totally up.
Well, I think so there's kind of like a little Easter egg hidden there that I think you would only sort of recognize on the rereading. So right before they're apprehending this suspect, right, because he's implicated in a murder, her partner says something about cancer. So he says, like, let's get this cancer off the streets or something like that.
Right.
And so that really triggers her to like blow everything up. She like points her weapon at her partner. And in doing so, she ruins everything because that's something you don't do. And you know, it's, you know, nowadays the people have their phones out. People are putting this online, right? So she's this unhinged detective. And so because of that, she's put on leave. She's put on administrative leave with the NYPD. And when the book starts, it's 6 months after that. So she's been on administrative leave for 6 months. During that time, her husband left her because he's a captain with the NYPD. He can't, you know, be associated with that. They're having a hard time communicating. It's like there's a lot of strife at home. And so for 6 months, she's kind of been wallowing when she gets this phone call that says, can you help us out? And that's when she gets in her head that like, here's what she's going to do to get her job back, to get Eric back. And she doesn't realize that what she actually has to figure out is why she pointed her weapon at her partner, not, you know, solving this case.
But even that was unrealistic thinking on her part, because solving a crime out in the sticks would not have gotten her any kind of recognition with the NYPD, who probably thinks that sticks are, oh, you know, that's not real crime.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Any recognition.
She was in such denial, but like she was so desperate. She was so desperate that she was just like trying to grasp at straws, you know?
Well, I have to say there was a lot of twists and turns, and I did find that I was going back and rereading though.
Okay.
Because I said, "What? Wait, what happened?" Like, but you know, I always marvel at people who write, because I just don't think that that's something I could ever, you know, put more than, or imaginative writing. That's the thing. I mean, I can kind of write stuff, but not anything that really is imaginative. So that's why I'm curious to see how if you had like a plot line that you were trying to follow.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I knew sort of that the main plot would be, you know, how does she figure out what happened? And a lot of it was just like excavating, like, you know, peeling back the layers of the people she meets, or peeling back the layers of the place that she's at, and giving everybody a history and everybody something that's happened so that, the red herrings come by pretty naturally. Because they're just, one of the things that I think is fun about this genre is that people lie in their real lives all the time. And very few people are lying because they're murderers. And so you get a lot of people in the book lying constantly, but only one person actually killed anybody.
Yeah, that's interesting.
We had read a story about twins in real life, and when I saw the twins, Morden and Estella, and I said it was interesting with the interaction that the girls had, and then how Maud took over and was Estrella and herself, and led like two lives and had the bones and everything. It was like if I took all the books that I've read lately and took a little piece out of each one, it would fit into your story.
Yeah, I'm so glad.
We've read some.
Yeah, I think twins are really fun. I've always been fascinated because it's like, I've known identical twins before, and if I know them really well, I can tell them apart. It's like not an issue. And so it was like playing with that, where it's like, how is it that you could have twins who, people could mistake one for the other? And I think that was really fun to play with.
Well, I think that it was a very interesting read for all of us. We, just so you know, we've been reading all different types of books, nonfiction, thrillers, I think historical fiction, and we just keep going. We've been mixing it up. So this is I think the first thriller we've had for a while.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah, so it was great. Thank you for joining us. And
I had so much fun.
We appreciate you taking the time, and I guess we'll keep an eye out for your next book.
Yes, please do. And we'll find out, Carolyn, if you were right.
Oh, I can't wait.
What's the name of your next book? The one that...
Oh, it doesn't have a title yet. I wish. They have to go through all of these layers of the publisher has to agree and the marketer has to agree and all of these things. So there's no real title yet, but I'll let you guys know when we have one.
But do you have a timeline that you have? Are you under any particular pressure to finish?
Yeah, so it's due in November. So it'll be published, what year is it? It's 2023, in 2025. In the beginning of 2025.
Wow.
Well, we'll be looking for that book.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Welcome.
After we edit it, we'll be putting it on our YouTube channel, and then we'll let you know. So it's been very, it's been a great way to share. Sometimes for the people who weren't able to make it, they get to see the recording. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I'm glad.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording group. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.